I call this meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. So approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder? And Naman moves.
Sorry.
No, you can't. You don't have any voting rights, Denver.
I'd like to say that.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, Dad seconds. Unless there's any objections, I'm going to take that item by consensus. Moving on to the territorial acknowledgement. The Board of Directors acknowledges the University of Waterloo is on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our organization operates on Haldeman Tract, land promised to 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Moving on to the oral conflict of interest declaration, the chair poses the following question in relation to any items of business on the agenda for this meeting. Does any director have an actual, perceived, or potential conflict of interest? Going once. Going twice. Okay. Moving on to the reports. Sir, did we want to do the reports first, or do we want to do the special orders? Because I'm just noticing that we have our guests with us right now.
Yeah, I guess you can probably, or you've already approved the agenda. I wanted to say probably move a motion to move that agenda item up. So we take the special orders first, and then you do the reports after.
Yeah, I'm just gonna move to amend the agenda so that we're doing the special orders now, as opposed to later. For the folks, Nadia, Amanda, are you good to go now, or do you want me to still invite you some time?
Yeah, no, we're good to go.
Okay. Just 1 second, procedural stuff. Can I get a seconder on the motion? Okay, Iman. If I see no complaints here, I'm going to take that item by consensus. So then instead of moving to reports, we're going to move into item 3.1, WUSA consultation on the review of policy 42. So there's a little template motion that describes a little bit of what's going on, but I will let Nadia and Amanda take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. It's really lovely to be here with you all tonight. Thanks so much for including us on your agenda. For those who aren't familiar, my name is Amanda Cook. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the director of the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Office. And I'm here with Nadia Singh from the Secretariat's Office. Do you want to say hi, Nadia?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Nadia. We're also joined by Ravita Surjvali from my office as well, and she's popping on to wave and say hi, and she's going to be taking some notes, and she's an integral part of the 42 review process as well. And so just to refer back to the memo you would have all received in the agenda, we're here today with regard to the Policy 42 review process and how important it is to be including student consultations throughout the review period. And so part of our rationale for being here is to ask if there's any feedback with regard to policy, broadly speaking, whether that's if you have any kind of direct understanding or knowledge of issues that folks have had, or indirect knowledge, any feedback that you might have had just post reviewing the policy and procedures that were attached in the memo, also understanding the time of year. Perhaps a lot of folks didn't have a chance to review it, and that is okay. We do have a general feedback forum that's available on the SV Pro website, so I'm going to pop that link in the chat. I think just going to do the copy here. And so even if after today's meeting you want to take a little bit more time to look over the policy and to think through some feedback or thoughts that you might have about it, you can fill out the confidential feedback form on the SV Pro website. And then lastly, we're hoping to pick your brains about what the best ways to reach out to students, like undergraduate students, to elicit their feedback, thoughts, concerns about policy, as well as we have a more kind of robust sexual violence survey, like feedback survey, that we're hoping to ask some like student leader members within the WUSA community to look through and to provide some thoughtful feedback around. And so really would love to invite your thoughts on who we should be approaching for that as well. So with that, want to kind of just open it up the floor to, first of all, ask if there is any feedback that folks wanted to bring forward right off the top.
Sorry, is this for policy 42 as a whole?
Yep.
Okay. To be honest, I have not been through it before this meeting, so just gonna be transparent with that.
Yeah.
But I wonder what's I don't know how much it talks about recourse and enforcement of that policy. I don't know if that's captured somewhere else, but I know that's something we've certainly heard from students is that there's been some issues around, things not being followed up on. So it might also be things not being in line with the policy, but also I just worry about if things are in policy, the policy is involved, what happens, right?
Okay.
Okay. That might be captured somewhere else as well. I recognize.
Yeah. I mean, all feedback is good feedback, right? So, we do have the procedures that try to capture some of the recourse and some of the process that happens upon the submitting of a formal complaint. And certainly we want to ensure that that's as clear as possible so folks know what to expect when and should they feel that they'd like to pursue a policy complaint. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
It's weird being the one sharing the meeting and raising my hand, but anyways. Interestingly enough, I actually went to a provincial forum on campus-wide sexual violence somewhat recently. And we were looking at some of the policies at other universities and whatnot. So I guess I'll just say off the top of my head that the fact that we have protections for like if, the incident involves like alcohol or drug use or something like that, and someone is assaulted during that time where they're sure that they're not going to be penalized for that other related activity that was part of the detail. So I think that's a really good thing that we do end up having. I also know that we do have interim measures in place, and I've seen the accessibility office be a lot more open and more available as a resource to support students who have trauma as a result of those experiences. In terms of where I think some of the gaps or issues are, I think I know that the university strives to be survivor-centric. Simultaneously, though, the ideas of natural justice that are part of the policy, where if a person is accused, they have the right to know who is accusing them and to respond to that. From what I've heard from students, it's just very scary. They're very scared of fear of reprisal, and I know that the policy says no reprisal against anyone, but in practice, I think that's a lot harder. The other thing too is when you're a student leader and you're in charge of certain student spaces and whatnot, the way that the policy works is it's only the associate dean who gets to know that a decision really has been made, right? Or in limited cases, it's some other folks, but there have been cases within our student spaces where student leaders have witnessed sexual harassment or assault and then felt that they needed to step in and provide a safe space. And now they're struggling to provide available support and try and keep that space safe and navigate all these things. And I think from the standpoint of WUSA, and we clearly have to have more conversations about this, but like from a resource perspective, like me as a student, I think I put a lot more trust in the university's resources to determine whether or not an incident has taken place or not than I would say our resources. And I think that there is an openness towards forming some sort of agreement where if, WUSA is just told that, hey, like you just need to keep these two students apart, that we'd be happy to oblige. But right now, like making students go to two separate processes is just very, difficult and upsetting to them. And I'm struggling in supporting students through our own process while being a student myself. And like that's some work that we need to do, but we're all part of one community. The other thing is, I know that there's some, it's unclear what happens when an incident occurs between a Waterloo and Laurier student. And they're literally down the street from one another, right? Like, so I think some more clarity in terms of what policies apply there. Some clarity there would be helpful. So also work integrated learning, sometimes sexual harassment and whatnot happens there. I know students are usually referred to HR there because of a whole bunch of employment restrictions and stuff. Helpful that the co-op office has been getting more support and specific people to help in those cases. I think students would like there to be more involvement from the university. I can understand if that can't be the case, but I do think that a lot of students experience issues there, and just because people don't tend to trust their co-op advisor, they're not reaching out for help. So something should be addressed there. But some work is being done, and I do appreciate that, but I just think some work needs to be done.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And like that was incredible. Like, thank you for all of that feedback. And again, just reminding folks that, this isn't like your only chance to offer feedback and thoughts. Like if anything else kind of comes up for you, or you're referring back to it and you think of something else, please do go back to the feedback form, or you can even just like directly reach out to me too. I'm happy to take that feedback from you folks. Thanks.
Rania has her hand up.
Great.
Just to ask, do you guys hear me all right? Is there any background noise?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so I just kind of wanted to ask, how does the policy protect the students? Kind of sort of dive into detail for that. And another thing that I wanted to ask was that, so kind of statistically speaking, most of the time, a lot of allegations, less than 1% of allegations are usually false, right? Which means that over 99% of allegations are usually true. But then there's difficulty of sort of proving that because sexual assault is very different from, say, like other assaults where you can physically see the repercussions for somebody attacking another person. Like you can't see any visible wounds. You can't really get any DNA testing most of the time, so things like that. So how does the policy protect students in that way? And how does it prevent, if it's happening again, does it like prevent the person that's been accused from accessing certain spaces on campus? That's my whole question.
Yeah, so clarity, I apologize. I think you cut out a little bit in the first point. If you could just repeat your first question again.
Yeah, sure. So since less than 1% of allegations are actually false, does that, and like most of the time, it's very hard to prove sexual assault, right? Because there's no physical proof of it occurring. So how does the policy essentially protect students in that scenario?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the policy that we have on campus, its purpose is not to prove and to look into like DNA samples and so on. It's not like a criminal justice process, but rather it's an administrative process. And so what the policy is seeking to determine is if on a balance of probabilities more likely than not to have occurred, and then are the desired outcomes that are articulated by the survivor are we able to facilitate those and to accommodate those? So if that means that somebody is being asked to refrain from being in certain spaces, so the person who's alleged to have caused harm, can they not enter certain buildings? Can they not participate in certain activities on campus? So that's kind of the main focus of the policy. Nadia, feel free to jump in.
No, I think you did a really good job of covering that. So I'm trying to understand what you're asking, Rania. To be honest, you're wondering how does the policy protect survivors?
Yes.
So whether a person, I just might add to what Amanda has said, whether a survivor discloses or files a complaint, a formal complaint, the university is ready to support that person. And without a formal complaint, we're limited in what we can do, but we're not limited in the support that we can give to the survivor. What we can't do is start, in that case where there's just been a disclosure, we can't do anything to the respondent. We can't put any restrictions on the respondent without giving. This is where that balance that Steph was talking about with natural justice comes in, where we can still support the survivor, and we do support the survivor where there's a formal complaint and a finding of a breach of policy. We do support the survivor when they disclose. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, thank you.
Rania, just to kind of add on to that, there are many different ways in which we can sort of meet the student where they're at, we meet the survivor where they're at, and really ascertain like what has been the impact and what are the ways that we can help mitigate that impact. And that's not always through proceeding through a formal policy 42 process, but rather looking into workplace accommodations, housing accommodations, academic accommodations, safety planning, connecting with counseling services or other support services. So, we don't actually get a lot of 42 complaints at the end of the day, but instead we have a lot of folks coming forward who are really struggling and really looking for ways to try and level the playing field so that they can engage in their academics and like being within the university community in the ways in which that they could prior to the event happening. So that's kind of our focus. And if that means 42 as well, we're right there with them. If that means interested in reporting to police, we're there for that too. So just whatever the student happens to need.
So just a follow-up question. Now I know that this question that I'm about to ask, its answer will probably overlap with also the criminal justice system, but I'm more so asking from the perspective of what the university would do. Let's say there's one person, several allegations against them. What does the university do in that case?
So I think the first thing that I would wonder about is the comfort level and folks feeling that they can come forward and disclose that information. And so if there are multiple concerns coming forward, then that's something that we would bring up through the administration and through the line management. So I would tell my boss and say, hey, we have multiple concerns coming forward. And again, wanting to understand, is this secondhand information? Is this third-hand information? How do the people who've experienced the harm feel about this moving forward in any capacity if they haven't been involved in the sharing of information in the first place? So there's lots of different variables that we are considering, and all with the mind of trying to maintain campus safety, but then also maintaining the safety of those who directly experience the harm as well. So we're trying to consider lots of like moving pieces at the same time with the ultimate goal of safety all along the way.
All right, sorry, I have just a couple more questions.
Yeah, for sure.
So one more question that I kind of wanted to ask was that confidentiality, well, I know that's completely maintained from the like the side of the staff and whoever is supporting policy 42, but I also wanted to ask, how does the university help keep students safe? Because if I'm being honest, a lot of the time the perpetrator can essentially sort of put the dots together as to who outed them because they know what they did. So how does the university sort of protect that when coming in contact with someone who is a perpetrator. Sorry if I'm breathing very heavily. I just got off the bus, but
That's okay.
yeah. So that was one question I had. I'll ask that one first, and then I'll ask my next one.
Okay, sure. So any steps that are taken without the other person being made aware, those are entirely confidential and between the survivor and any of the folks who are supporting them in putting in place those accommodations and so on. If there are any steps that are being requested that mean that it would change the way that the person who's alleged to have caused harm interacts with campus or with their studies, then that would require that formal complaint process where the person who's alleged to have caused harm knows who's bringing forward the complaint so that they're able to respond to it and so on, like Stephanie had mentioned earlier. And so without that kind of more formal process where that person's able to respond to the allegations, then the focus is entirely on what kind of adjustments can be made specifically for the survivor themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the last thing is just like a feedback thing that I want to mention. Steph may have already probably said this in another way. I think that policy 42 or the university in general should be transparent about the process they take to help students feel safe in terms of communication. So let's say you have the main University of Waterloo Instagram page, just for example. I think that or like you Waterloo Life, one of the two does post what to do in case you experience sexual assault or harassment. So I think if it shows what the university is doing, exact steps, and how it's different from law enforcement or the legal system, I think that would really, really help in showing students how the university can protect them, because I think one of the concerns is not being believed or not being taken seriously, which is something that I did sort of face in first year as well. Like there was like a mature, like he was a master's grad, still using campus facilities, and he would just kind of get too close. And I do remember like mentioning and like reporting it to the services, the sexual assault support services on campus. But I was told that because he hadn't done anything or nothing that I couldn't necessarily prove, I couldn't really do anything about it. So I think that's like what students are usually told as well. So I think it's really important to kind of tackle that and show students like what's in the university's capacity versus what's not in the university's capacity. So yeah,
that clarity of language is so important. I entirely agree. Thanks so much. Yes.
I was curious, did you folks have any data on or like any information about say cases do go through, there's a report, and then the outcomes? Is there any data reported on those outcomes, not specific on individuals, but just on in aggregate what solutions tend to be, or are we doing any recording like that to ensure that the policy is working as intended?
That's a great question. We don't report on outcomes, and as I mentioned earlier, we just don't have very many 42 complaints, and so to report on outcomes could potentially negatively impact the people who are involved in those processes. Also due to confidentiality, even if it's not tied to an individual, there's a risk there that there could be some way to find out who was involved and negatively impact them. And I think part of the way in which we try to attempt to address the concerns are considering the desired outcomes of the survivor that they articulate in policy, which can vary quite a great deal between survivors, as well as what say the investigation demonstrates versus what the associate dean, who's a decision maker, determines to be an appropriate outcome. And so there's a lot of like a case-by-case analysis of what an appropriate outcome should be in each individual case, rather than trying to fit each case into a box that doesn't necessarily quite meet everybody's needs. So appreciating that desire to have that transparency around like, here are some of the outcomes that typically happen. And I know that something that's been talked about before is like, could we even just have like examples of what could possibly be within the realm of an outcome? So definitely hear that feedback for sure.
Okay. Sorry, I have a couple follow-up questions.
Yeah.
So if anybody else wanted to jump in before me.
I had a quick, I don't know if it's a question or a note regarding timelines. I talked recently with some student leaders who are helping people file policy 33 and 42 complaints regarding stuff that's happening. And there was this discontentment about not knowing how long the case will take to resolve versus, or even if it will be resolved or if it will just be stuck in limbo. So if we can have any guarantees about, like, if you have a case that will be looked at within this time, or we will provide you updates or something like that.
I mean, updates are always thought to be provided throughout the process, and something that we try to be incredibly transparent about, particularly when there's a formal process in play, is that there could be a lot of variables that impact timing of things. So, for example, if there's an investigator that's been brought on board, typically externally to the university, and there's a number of people that need to be interviewed as a part of that process, some of the delays could be related to, that's the word, the way, what's the availability, and maybe somebody is unwell, or maybe somebody needs to reschedule, and maybe it's around exams and things of that nature. So try to be transparent as much as possible with the folks involved so that they're aware of some of the delays in time, or like when they can anticipate hearing things. And then there's sometimes just like unexpected things that kind of come up throughout the process that we again try to be as transparent about, without also maybe potentially impacting confidentiality of the people involved. So hear that, absolutely. It's a massive issue that we definitely are seeking to try and address in policy.
Yeah.
If I could just add to that.
Yeah.
Because I work on a lot of other policies as well in the Secretariat. So it comes up in other policies as well. Timelines is an issue across the board. And it's really a balance between setting these goals for this is ideally when we'd like to have a decision by, and then dealing with the reality that there is so much flexibility needed on a case-by-case basis, wanting to be transparent, right, and set expectations. So if we say it's going to be 30 days for an investigation, then it's setting this expectation that it's very likely we're not going to be able to meet that, given all the variables that Amanda just talked about. So where we can give timelines, we do. So, for example, after the investigation is complete, there's 10 days to get the decision out. Well, that's doable. But the investigation itself, I mean, who knows how many witnesses there are going to be and who those witnesses are going to point to, all kinds of things. So just wanted to add that, hear your concern, and we'll work on it, but I don't know that there's much that can be improved in policy other than being really transparent that we do our best. The university does their best to meet those timelines and strives to meet those timelines. It's just not possible most of the time.
Yeah.
And things are not left in limbo. Definitely not left in limbo.
I think a really important point is that until reading policy, the words are black and white, right? But all of the situations that run through that policy are gray and nuanced. And so it's not even like we can get good at what we're doing and troubleshoot and fix it and find a process that works, because every case is so completely different that it requires a great amount of thought and meeting of the minds and trying to figure out what is the best way to get these two students through this situation so that they can get on with University of Waterloo life.
Right. I will add, this is probably not something that's like in the purview of this discussion, but usually before a formal policy thing happens, students are encouraged to seek informal resolution. And that process can also take a while. And in the mind of the student, that's like, part of all of the delay that adds up. Like they don't see the difference between, oh, this was when the formal process started and this was the informal resolution. So I don't think there's a solution. I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll say as
Thank
it
you.
pertains to policy 70, is it policy 70? Is that the petitions, grievances?
Yep.
Yes. Like that has been brought up and like they are trying to work on resolving it. It's just a very long, arduous process to apparently review a policy. But
Right.
this one like actually has a deadline where it needs to be completed, I think, before September. Is that correct?
That's the goal.
Okay.
Fall 2023 is the goal. September may be a little bit early in fall 2023.
September is ambitious.
Can you believe it's March?
Right.
Okay. I'm just gonna let Denver finish off like one more sort of three thoughts.
Three thoughts?
Three thoughts here. Be mindful of time. Otherwise, you folks can reach Amanda, Nadia, over email.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Opportunities for consultation. Last thing, I just put a little thing on the chat about co-op that you folks can grab. I'll also send the actual APSU policy we have, but WUSA has given a bunch of talk about this 2 years ago, and we developed sort of some recommendations for the university. So
Thank you.
Already.
Awesome. Thanks.
I had a few thoughts. I just wanted to highlight one about the data collection piece, because I think I might have presented it not exactly how I was intending. But I was thinking more so something that's every time, do we have any sort of system, or would we be potentially looking at a system of every time there's some sort of complaints or accusation that it is just logged that there was one? And then if it is escalated to use the policy, then those are marked as the number of cases and the number that did. So not any specific details, just was the policy actually utilized after a complaint was made. So that way we know numbers of how many complaints are moving forward and how many are, for whatever reason, stopping, right? Because it's a really high proportion, and maybe we should look at that.
I did just pop into the chat the link to our page on the SB Pro website to our annual reports. And so we're required by the Ministry of Colleges and Universities and to the university to report to Board of Governors about that exact data. So how many folks are coming forward, how many are proceeding through formal policy, what types of sexual violence are being experienced, those kinds of things, including education and prevention efforts as well. So take a look. And if you have any questions about that, just let me know.
Awesome. The other piece I was going to ask is, sorry, there's two more. I'll be really quick. One was, I know that we have policy like 33, 42, 70, 71, like essentially 5 policies that all kind of capture this concept of student code of conduct. And I actually have a background, I'm a master as well. So they had a student code of conduct that just kind of captured all that. It was fairly accessible to students. I have heard that one complaint is that there's 5 different policies to potentially sit through. Was there an intentional choice about that, or is it just more so been like a long-term piece where we've developed these separate policies that also kind of rely on each other?
Nadia?
It's all we've got for now. We don't have a student code of conduct. We don't have a singular document that encapsulates it all. So it's just 42 is on its own because we don't have anywhere else to put it, but make it its own policy.
Okay, I guess my follow-up on that would just be just being conscious of processes, or like how a student would move through this, having that there's multiple policies, just ensuring there's not contradictions. I'm sure you folks are looking at that as well, but figured I'd do my due diligence and flag it. And then my last question was, I've heard a little bit from some students about WUSA spaces and how they fit into the policy. So I was curious if folks could elaborate on that a little bit.
Do you have a little bit more of a specific question?
I've heard that there's been some issues with following through policy with some of our spaces.
Yeah.
or that folks have been turned away. So I was curious why that is, because we have some of our own practices, but to me it makes a lot more sense that everybody's going through the university in the HR available, especially if multiple students are involved in an instance.
It's a very complicated question that you're asking, and again, it's not an answer that you probably want to hear, but it really is on a case by case basis, depending on what is brought forward. So the decision maker in these policies is the associate dean, right? So
Okay.
when the information is brought to the associate dean, the associate dean has to do an analysis of what fits into WUSA's jurisdiction and what fits into the university's jurisdiction. And it can be pretty slippery and pretty tricky. And it also depends on the conduct that's being complained of. That we have to figure out which policy it fits under, if any. So I'm not really answering your question, but I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
And the answer is that we have to figure it out at the moment, case by case.
So I guess my follow-up on that would be, if there was a scenario where, say, something happened with math students in a math space, it would go to the dean, correct?
No, associate dean.
Or sorry, associate dean.
Yep.
So I guess the scenario that I'm curious about is like, why does it go to the associate dean? Because if it goes to the associate dean, like WUSA doesn't have an associate dean for things to go to. Like, you don't have an equivalent.
So, but you have, if I understand correctly, you have codes of conducts for certain spaces and certain societies, right?
We do, but I believe our HR is tied in with the university. So our HR is the.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Well, like through co-employment, it's my understanding that our HR is, like, any HR issues we have as WUSA goes through the university. And I thought that those policies override WUSA. Like, WUSA can't make policies that are in contravention of Waterloo's HR policies.
So our HR policies, like, are you talking about like our employment policies?
Yes, I guess it would be employment policies.
Denver, if you like, I can try and get at what I think you're getting at.
Go for it.
Okay. I think the sort of thing that's been tossed around that Denver's trying to get at is that when things happen in WUSA spaces or happen in any sort of context where it might make sense for something like WUSA's code of conduct to jump in, it's tricky because we don't have anything that's comparable to like an investigative process, and we don't have any like procedures or appropriate training or honestly even capacity to be able to do that in a way that also feels appropriate for the situation, especially when it's likely that that's simultaneously ongoing with the university as well. So we don't really have like a parallel process to be able to do that. So I think we're looking for clarity on how our processes can lean on the university processes so that we're not trying to poorly duplicate a process at the expense of the students who are going through something difficult.
I hear your feedback. I hear what you're saying. There are a lot of nuances to this that I mean, we're here to talk about policy 42. So I don't know that I'm in a position to address these questions or the comment. I hear what you're saying. I think the best that I can tell you for now is that the university looks at it on a case by case basis. So, when something comes forward, we really look at, are they just sort of like as Amanda has explained, who's the complainant? Is there an official complaint? Which policy does it fall under? Is the conduct something that falls under that specific policy, or is it conduct that is outside of the university's jurisdiction because there are agreements with WUSA on what they have control over and what the university has control over. So I hear what you're saying. I'm just not sure that this is the venue for that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I just want to wrap up the conversation here, just because we do have other items to get through on our agenda. But I guess just from conversation we're having with Deborah and Catherine, I think you can take away that like there is a lot of confusion surrounding jurisdiction, and from the student perspective, we view it might be helpful to have more conversations and consolidation there because we have observed students get stuck in those processes. And would very much like them not to, but obviously a little bit more complicated conversation, but that is something that I want the university to think about.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
So,
thank you for having us.
Otherwise, I will make sure that your information and next steps get circulated. I'll also chat with the board sort of informally in our group chat if they have any ideas about consultations, different groups they can reach out to.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks very much for the thoughtful feedback, everyone.
Take care. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, back to the agenda.
Sorry.
Yeah, did you want to do that motion we talked about?
Sorry, I think I'm muted. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, I'd like to motion to move the decision items, so that would be 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 ahead of the reports.
Okay.
Agenda item 2.
Seconder
So,
for that.
sorry, motion, yeah.
I second.
That was that, right? Okay. If there's no complaints to that end, I'm going to take that item by consensus, then we'll deal with the decision items first. So approval of the minutes held in March 9th, 2023. It resolved that board approves the public minutes in March 9th, 2023 as presented. Can I get a mover and seconder?
I'll move.
10 moves. Sorry, someone has to aggressively say, I think I saw a hand raised, but I don't know. Someone raise your hand, please, to second.
Sure.
Okay. Naman seconds. Are there any concerns with the minutes? Okay, seeing none. I will take that item by consensus and we will move on to the next item. Hello. I will take myself as mover for this. Be it resolved that board approves to reschedule the meeting set to hold on the 6th of April to insert date. There needs to be a date. Okay, everyone open your calendars right now. Are you free on the Friday of that week?
What date is the Friday?
It is on the 7th.
April 7th? On Good Friday?
Okay, never mind. Okay. Here's what I'm going to propose we do is that we have a finance committee meeting then, but the finance committee meeting has not really been meeting that much. So if board is comfortable reviewing the audit as a whole, then we can move the board meeting 1 week down. I'm asking to do this because, there's an WUSA event that both Denver and I need to attend, so we will not be present for the next meeting. If you don't care whether or not Denver and I are in attendance, you could always just host the meeting and I will be absent, Denver will be absent. But if you would like us to be there and present for any decisions that being made, then we can move it there. But I will just take in the fill in the blank now of the item that I'm moving to on 13. Okay.
Will they make a rule that you can't have meetings in the final exam period?
Okay, you know what? Fine. Denver and I are just gonna be messing.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's fine. I don't actually.
No, it's okay. It's like,
I think it makes more sense to just us not be there.
okay, yeah, fine, whatever. No one second this item for me.
What the hell?
Whatever, I tried, man.
I can second. That's fine.
No, it's okay, because then we don't have to consider it. All I ask is that we don't put anything really, really super important on that agenda.
I don't make the agenda, so.
No, because anyone can put anything forward.
That's
But anyways, fine, whatever. No seconder, moving on.
Okay, we'll make sure not to, do anything like remove the president and vice president effective immediately.
We do that?
I don't think
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I'm not a VP, so
Yes, you can by majority vote.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Writing the motion now.
Okay, have fun, guys. Okay, moving on to 4.3, motion to reform the internal funding committee, from Jeffy Boy. I will take Jeffy Boy as the mover. Can I get a seconder? Okay, no seconds. Okay, take it away, bud.
All right. Can everyone see my screen?
yes.
All right. I'll try to keep this brief. Basically, there's two aspects of this. One aspect is the SLEF constitution and bylaws are just out of date. That part is fairly simple, just updating positions that don't exist anymore and changing some wording to say from students council to the WUSA board of directors. So fairly uncontroversial. However, since we're doing this update anyways, there were a few other changes I was hoping to potentially discuss. What I've started with the plan just to give you an idea of what I'm suggesting. The motion that is on the agenda is just sort of the routine part, because the rest needs to really be done in discussion with university and some other perhaps staff members and the board in general. But we're going to have our little discussion today. It might be shorter due to the constraints we have. I'm hoping to take, once we have a bit of consensus on some items, this discussion to the university. We'll bring any final changes back to the board for review and approval, and then submit those changes to the Board of Governors for their stamp, either in their May meeting, or if we don't make that, then their June meeting. So what are these changes? Here is the current structure of the governing documents of SLEF. It's very fun. We have the SLEF Constitution, then apparently the WUSA bylaws apply, and then the SLEF bylaws apply, and then WUSA procedures apply, and SLEF council guidelines apply. So what this actually is in practice is, what it looks like right now is there is a SLEF board of directors, which has apparently never really met and doesn't really do anything anymore. Which is fine. There's a SLEF Funding Council, but the SLEF Funding Council has just assigned everything to the WUSA Internal Funding Committee, which is also okay. The WUSA Board of Directors, sets up all the stuff for the Internal Funding Committee, and we have EOI docs which are maybe lost. So those might need to be rewritten. So a couple issues with this. It's really complicated for absolutely no reason. Like, these two bodies don't do anything at all. There's kind of a lack of accountability where the IFC can kind of do whatever it wants, and there isn't really any while there is supposed to be some oversight in the docs, it isn't either in place or is kind of circumvented by the whole, like, the IFC is actually the funding council now. And there's also a lot of confusion around like who owns what. Like, it took a while to figure all of this out in the first place, and I don't think it should be this difficult for future boards or whoever is running the administration of these, the allocations of these funds. Some other problems which are not so much related to the organization, we have a very low number of applications every term. Very few people know about these funding opportunities, which means less fund projects on campus, which is the whole point of these funds in the first place. We don't have that many formal funding guidelines. There's often, and sometimes applications lack key information or context. So I found sometimes it's difficult for the committee to make a complete decision at times. So summary of ideas, I just spit them all up onto the board instead of, so this might be a lot, but I'll try to speed through this. So we do go through the routine updates, and honestly, if people aren't comfortable with the rest, we can just stop there and just submit sort of the motion as is with a change or two. But I'd really like to protect the membership requirements of whatever shape or form the funding council for SLEF and EOI in their bylaws. So they will always be represented by 100% undergraduate Waterloo students, and to have an at-large member requirement so that future boards, since the procedure is actually sort of governs SLEF right now, the board can kind of just change the membership of that, and they could technically just make the membership like a few directors and then just start approving random projects as they please. I get that there's currently university oversight for the actual allocation of those funds, but yeah, just helps avoid a bit of those shenanigans and just makes that clear. We might need to rewrite EOI documents if they don't exist, because I don't think we've been able to find them yet. Reduce the amount of SLEF documents. There's like 17 pages of constitution and bylaws. Some of them are required, but they can really be simplified. We either reduce it very much and just say, okay, whatever form the IFC takes replaces it, or we just enshrine what we imagine the IFC into these bylaws, and that also helps distinguish it as an external committee rather than an internal one. And we should also just minimize some of the administrative overhead. We're supposed to run an AGM, which used to be a council meeting, which we ideally can just get rid of, and the SLEF board should ideally never meet. Right now, they still are technically supposed to meet every year to reconfirm the members of the board. But yeah, it would also kind of be nice if the SLEF board was just the WUSA board, and we could submit any changes for approval to the current university board members, so that we, instead of like having to call in SLEF board meetings, which will probably ideally not ever have to happen, the WUSA board can sort of decide things and just get it approved by the university. Procedural ideas, I'd like to see IFC maybe meet once or twice a term. This is, again, sort of beyond the governing organization and sort of what I wanted to start with, but I just sort of saw all those problems above as I was doing it. I'd like to see IFC meet once or twice a term at set dates and focus a lot more on advertising to students so that people know about it and can apply. Students should present to the IFC or whatever form it takes live so that the funding council can ask them questions. We need to more clearly define expectations for both applications and funding criteria. For example, right now, EOI has a bunch of percentages on its criteria, but in practice, they don't really mean anything at the moment or aren't applied. Expiry of funds, right now, I think it's roughly 1 year. We could potentially review that. And then lastly, financial reports should be received once a term by either the funding committee or maybe a board overseeing it. Like the WUSA board, we should set allocation amounts every year based on the remaining funds and recommendations from the university, and try to make sure we're giving away as much money as possible, so this money is actually benefiting students as soon as possible. Yeah, sorry that took a bit of time, but I'd like to open the floor for a bit of discussion. And so the two directions we can go are either people don't like these ideas, we just want to update the docs so they're not all wrong, or we update the docs and also start talking with the university about how to implement some of these upper ideas. So the top half is stuff that needs to sort of go through the university. The bottom, I guess, is stuff we can decide ourselves. All right.
Angela, secondary, did you have specific things?
Take my turn after. I'm still thinking.
Okay. Ember, do you mind if I let Risser go first?
I was going to.
Okay.
I was going to invite Risser and Suzanne.
Can I quickly say something before I no longer have Wi-Fi?
Okay.
The first thing is just like big thanks to Jeff for like doing all this. I'm really excited about where it can go. The other thing was just a small clerical thing in the actual text of the motion. As I think Matthew pointed out, AVP, Associate Provost, students is Chris's job title, and then in the first mention of the Board of Directors, there's a missing S, so it just says Board of Director. So just a small clerical thing that's probably good to have fixed before we pass it.
Okay. Do you want a motion to amend to that effect?
Can Jeff Yeah, okay. Okay, we can do that fast. I
There's
motion
no
to
such thing
just,
as friendly amendment. Just
Okay.
someone second it.
yeah, I motion to do
Second.
that.
Second. I'm going to take that by consensus that we're going to make the changes to have the correct terminology there, as outlined by Catherine. And now we're back to normal speakers list.
Okay. So what I'd say is that we've been discussing this, and Jeff was right to flag it, and I've had discussions with Jeff, and I've had discussions with Suzanne and staff. I think that the changes you might be looking at here go beyond the scope of Jeff's motion. So I think what you might want to do is just, defer this for a meeting for Esther and maybe Suzanne and myself to come back with a report.
Jeff?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I did recognize that there wasn't there's a lot more to do. The motion itself, I guess, is just to get the ball rolling. Maybe we can be a further resolve that we endorse a review and the start of this process. That'd be really nice. I think in the timeline, what I imagine is right now, we're having these discussions. Really great. We just approve the first constitutional thing. Ideally, the Constitution doesn't have to change beyond that. Either way, it has to come back to us for review. We start talking with the university, these conversations with Matt, with Suzanne, with staff, with the university, and then in either the last April meeting that we discussed earlier, or in the new with the new board in May, we bring these changes to board for final approval, because either way they'll have to come back.
Yeah. Also, that's something we'll need to do with the new policy manual, is that we still need to make sure IFC exists in some shape or form to serve the function that it currently functions. Again, I don't necessarily think that requires it to be a board committee per se, but it does need to exist to serve the function. And there's a couple other groups that, again, don't need to be able to direct board or inform the work of board, but do need to exist because other processes are dependent on them. But yeah, no. I guess if you would like to amend the motion to that effect to get some proposals and stuff from the staff, that'd be helpful. I would want us to take a closer look, especially IFC or former members of IFC, just because I know that there's been a couple of issues with that committee in the past. It was my first bone to pick when I joined WUSA Student Council a very long time ago. And the time when I was around, it was intentionally under advertised so that things that ought to have been funded by WUSA's capital fee, which didn't exist at the time, could be funded through it. So that's why I have a preference for at-large students to sit on that. And I'm uncertain whether or not I want the board to be the board of this fund, just because, again, I've seen historically it not be open at too much student groups. I find it's often used by groups who ought to have been accounted for in our general budget, and that makes me very uncomfortable. So there ought to be some sort of compromise found, but yeah, overall, good catch. And yes, this did need fixing for a very long time, and I'm sorry I didn't fix it, but Mr. Dunbar?
On the university related pieces, the top half of the page, do we have Suzanne on the call?
She was.
Suzanne, if you're on the call, I invite you to speak on, you think, the feasibility of these, specifically our board being the select board. I feel like the university would just say no. So just wanted your insight on the bullet points on the top half.
Okay. Thanks, Denver. Yeah, no, that's okay. I know Jeffrey showed to me earlier. I just I haven't really had a chance to go through some of these things, but I agree with you in terms of the composition of the board. The endowment fund is the university's, it's not ours. So I don't know that they would be comfortable with that, but again, that doesn't mean you can't ask and have conversations. So but there might be some resistance. I believe that's probably why there is a partnership with university administrators and us on that creates the board. And the rest of them, I have to be honest with you, they're discussion items, like Matt kind of connected to, or suggested, maybe a report and go back and have some discussion and talk about some feasibility and see what makes sense to come back and ask the board for approval.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I saw Angela's hand first, and then I'll go to Jeff.
Yeah, I was kind of going to echo a bit of what Steph said. I also wanted to kind of echo that I think that having at-large student input is always a good thing, because I feel like it also kind of helps with the recognition of the fund, because obviously, like, if the concern is about if one of the concerns is that not enough people know about it, obviously, of course, if like more students are involved that aren't just necessarily board, it provides like more spread of information that way. And also I think gives like students the ability to feel like they're able to make contributions, and that, is, I don't want it to be like another thing that like they're like, oh, board is doing another thing or whatever. I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah.
Jeff.
Thanks. I think I just want to make sure there might be a small misunderstanding. So the SLEF board is not the one who makes the funding decisions. That would be the SLEF, or at least currently it is the SLEF Funding Council. All the SLEF board does is like review changes to how how SLEF is actually governed, I guess. So that would be bylaw changes or any major directional changes. The Funding Council has a lot of autonomy. They're really the core of this, and I think it's definitely important. And I think I said here, this is something I strongly believe in as well. We need to enshrine that at-large members should be on the Funding Council of SLEF or EOI, because right now it's completely controlled by WUSA policies, which means that the WUSA board can actually go in right now and we can change the membership of the Funding Council to look like whatever we want. It can pretty much just be one person if we wanted to, which is not great. I'm not saying that would ever happen, but the fact that it can is not something that I like. The other thing, I think, in response to the board being the WUSA board, it was just an idea I had to remove some administration. The reason I think the university might be amenable to it, and why I want to bring it up with them at least, is because right now the board is effectively defunct, and the current structure of the board means any change that the board actually makes to the bylaws has to go to the UW Board of Governors anyways. So I'm thinking we can adopt similar language where before it goes to the Board of Governors, it goes to the associate provost or someone else. So just extra steps. So instead of we having to call them in for meetings about potentially routine things, we can just send important decisions to them for approval before it gets them. So they maintain the same control while giving us autonomy, which is sort of what they've done anyway, since they've let us do whatever we want with it at the moment.
Jeff, are you motioning the item that you've put there?
Right. Yeah, sorry. I'd like to make an amendment to the motion to add, be it further resolved that the Board of Directors endorses a review of SLEF, IFC, and EOI governing documents and procedures by WUSA and the university to be presented at a later board meeting no later than the end of May.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that?
You second it?
I can second it.
I second.
Okay, Angela seconds. Do we have any discussion on that item? Okay, seeing none, everyone opposed to the amendment, please raise your hand. Everyone abstaining from the amendment, please raise your hand. Jay abstains. Motion passes unanimously. I mean, not unanimously, but motion passes. Okay, moving back to the main motion. Have we finished discussion on this item? Any last minute things to add? Okay, seeing none. Everyone opposed to this item, please raise your hand. Everyone abstaining from this item, please raise your hand. It abstains. Okay, motion passes. Okay, cool. So because we have decided to put the decision items ahead, and the other item is just a discussion here, we actually go back up to reports. So Suzanne, are you good to talkie about report?
Yes, Steph, I'm ready to talkie report.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So the public report is just a couple of quick updates on where we're at in some of the recruitment and hiring places or spots, and then the larger update I'll say is an update to the board roadmap, or the annual roadmap update. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that. I'll just sort of quickly highlight that we went through it and color coded it. Hopefully that helps go through the 30, I think it's 30 pages ish of the report. Noticing that green is items that are completed, yellow is on track in terms of timelines, and red, we are either going to have to adjust the timelines or we won't be able to complete in the timelines. And we have updated and added a column with some further details and information about our color coding. So I don't know if folks have any questions about that update.
Any questions, concerns, comments, complaints, conundrums? I'm gonna give me another C word. Compliments.
Excellent report.
Always take the compliments. Thank you. That's great.
I provide a little bit of feedback.
Pardon?
Oh, sorry. Can I just provide a little bit of feedback on the status of where we are?
Sure.
I think overall we're making good progress. I think, especially given that the roadmap was a little bit ambitious in some places. That, like, if there were hiccups and whatnot in certain places, that's fine. I think though when it comes to some of our equity objectives, it felt like a lot of time was focused on the gender neutral bathrooms more so than accessibility, when gender neutral bathrooms only sort of vaguely fit within the task of acting upon the trans and racialized student report with health services, whereas there was a lot more things related to accessibility that were more explicitly sort of related. So I would just like to flag that in terms of the amount of like energy and resources that I saw spent on that was not where I, as a director, anticipated it to be spent. So the fact that we're behind on some of the accessibility items is kind of disappointing to me.
Okay, Steph, thank you. And I might need Melissa to comment on this in terms of, are we behind on timelines? That I'm just sort of sliding through some of the elements, and there's a lot of green and yellow, and I'm not sure if there's anything in particular. Melissa, if you have an update on that, that would be awesome.
Sure, I can kind of give a general update. I mean, I think a lot of the accessibility pieces are in progress, but certainly work to continue to be done on them over the coming term or so. Obviously, some of the conversations around accessibility we planned to have at what was formerly known as SEAC. So in terms of adjusting, that sort of changed how we were working on those things. So I think that would be the main one. In terms of the inclusive washrooms, all I can sort of say is obviously as that project was already majorly in progress in different ways, and GLOW had been supporting, and we sort of had the opportunity to try and get in and formalize things, get them where we wanted to make sure that they were for all the work that had been put in by the students of GLOW and others who were a big part of that project. I think just based on where it was at in rolling down the hill at the time that it was, we either got involved and helped sort those things out and support and get it to that finish line, or there might have been some bigger missed opportunities. So I don't disagree, Steph. Did it feel like maybe we got as much from that as the time put in? Maybe not, but based on where it was, and I think the importance of it and the work that had been put in prior by a number of students and students specifically connected to our services, I think it was just one of those things that we couldn't not engage in further. So I think the accessibility stuff is in a really good spot, hopefully right now, to gain some more momentum over the next term or so and get that where we want it to be. So work's been done there. It's just not as much to be able to show for it, maybe with some final recommendations or final next steps at this point, but a lot of it is underway. Some really good conversations and relationships with the accessibility office to get those next pieces in motion. So that would be sort of my high level thoughts to that.
Yeah, and again, just to clarify, that was, like I understand that it was a difficult position for multiple situations. And like some of my decisions in spring term played a part in terms of the ball getting rolling and us spending resources on that. I guess so, like when future things like this sort of come up, like my preference would be that the board is sort of made aware of that and makes sort of an intentional sort of decision there, because for me, I see like creating the roadmap is the elected students saying, hey, these are what we want the org to prioritize. And I know that there's going to be different opportunities that are, created and whatnot, and the staff might choose to pursue and whatnot. But I feel like that's something that the staff, should bring forward to board and say, hey, actually, we might get more progress or whatnot if we were to do this instead. Like, here's my sort of informed recommendation. Just because my concern is that, it should really be board driving the boat here. And it felt like we kind of let the services, specifically one service, drive the boat for what was a lot of resources for us. And I know that that was part of maintaining good relationships and empowering students. But I think it also came to the detriment of achieving some of our strategic goals. So when something is at odds in that way, I would just like some communication to happen with board, and I would like to believe that board would make, an informed decision to that end. But to me, it just felt like that was like one scenario where like other people were steering the ship and it wasn't really board with the strategic direction.
Okay, Steph, we'll note that, and we find ourselves in that similar situation, we'll update accordingly.
Okay, thank you. I just, again, wanted to provide feedback and perspective. I know that it's difficult and whatnot, and like it's, yeah. Okay. Anyone else have any questions, concerns, comments, compliments for Suzanne?
I have all the compliments for Suzanne and the staff. I think that broadly, I was very happy reading over this report. I just got here late. For those that are surprised, I'm only talking now. But I appreciated the format and a little bit of information given. In general, on the reporting format, on the reporting format, rather than even just the content of the report, I think it's a good sort of way to have that quick glance at what's going on. which I appreciate. And then more generally, on the content, it's just sort of good to see us at the places that we're at. And obviously there's different things to learn, different things to take away from, but overall, very happy with what's been going on in general as we're sort of figuring out this transition. And in the same amount that the board's figuring out, the staff is also figuring it out, and it's good stuff.
Thanks, Matthew.
Okay. If there's no other comments or questions here, I think we'll move on to next report. Weird because I don't see the president and VP's report. I know why the president's report isn't there. Did you submit yours on time, Denver?
No, we both missed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do director's reports and then we'll pretend we submitted ours on time. Hello, some of you didn't fill out your things. Others did. Thank you for the people who did. For future reference, if the committee doesn't meet, can you still just write down that it didn't meet? Does that be helpful?
We have one time in there where it was mentioned that we didn't meet quorum.
Okay. Yeah. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to highlight specifically? Chen.
Yeah. Imprint has been putting together a plan for, I don't know what the plan is referred to, but essentially Imprint 2.0, new Imprint, big updates are coming. They have some more specific details that I'll discuss in confidential session, but for all those watchers out there, exciting stuff just coming down the pipeline.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we will move to my report, I guess. Elena, do you know where my report is?
I can pull it up.
Are you sure?
No, but I can find it. Oh, sorry. I see what you're saying.
Okay. I'll just quickly go through mine. For folks, it should be like as a reply to the email that Esther sent. Yeah, WUSA wrapped up. Well, mostly wrapped up. On Sunday, we still have to meet and finish up plenary. Denver and I have also been in discussions with WUSA just regarding some of the structure of General Assembly that we feel has impeded WUSA's engagement and the ability of some of our students to participate as delegates. So hoping to get that addressed. I attended the Ontario-wide post-secondary forum for eradicating campus gender-based violence at the University of Toronto. So got a lot of helpful information there to inform the policy 42 consultations that are taking place. Also participated in a session by a nonprofit that's affiliated with WUSA around sexual violence related to experiential learning. So I'm going to pass on some of those resources to our relevant staff. Again, we received the draft policy manual, just a couple revisions and stuff, or things we need to consider that I wanted to highlight for board's consideration. Is that IFC probably needs to exist in some capacity for the dispersal and management of the EOI and SLEP funds. There's, I think, an interest in the Committee of Presidents still existing. Probably the way to solve this problem is just to put the terms of reference into the WUSA Society's MOU and still have the WUSA president responsible for promoting inter-university cooperation and communication through the societies and that, and also through AC. Out of all the committees, that one seems to be the most handy and impactful. So again, would advise that existing. I don't think it necessarily needs to be a board committee, but it is something that I think is WUSA's responsibility to provide a forum for. We'll also add that we have to have conversation with co-op to move over the co-op and experiential learning advisory committee if that's something that we want to do. because or else it's not going to exist. General meeting happened, thought that it went very well, turned into a stand-up comedian for a little bit, but all of the bylaw amendments got passed. So that is good. Felt like the at-large students felt heard. So thank you for the folks who helped them workshop their ideas. Some very exciting things and engagement happening there, but I think everyone left the situation quite happy and not overwhelmed. So that's first in a very long time with these meetings. WUSA teaching awards have been delayed a little bit. So we're just trying to figure that out. And transition. We are working on that with staff, Denver and I. And I would recommend that training dates should be solidified by the end of the nomination period to maximize attendance and engagement. Okay, any questions, concerns, comments, complaints? Cocoa Puffs.
Crazy thoughts.
Steph, quick question actually. Are board advisors a topic to be discussed in a confidential session, or can they be in public?
You want to message me what you want to say?
Sure.
Okay. You can ask that in public session.
Oh, I just wanted to ask.
You can ask them both, actually, but.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to ask if there were any updates on the process for determining board advisors for the 23-24 governing year.
I think Suzanne can provide an update on that.
Sure, I can provide a quick update. We are gathering. Actually, I wish Alana was here because she would give you a more detailed one, but we have started the process of getting 3 quotes for the upcoming year that we will provide a report to board. Again, I would expect, I know it'll be in April at some time. I'm not sure exactly which meeting it will be at for the board to consider.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah.
I should probably actually know this, but do we have a second meeting in April, or is the first week of April one our last one?
I think we have like 3 meetings or something.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Pack them in. Is Melissa still around?
No, she had to hop off.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask a question. If you happen to know it, you can answer it. If you don't, then it's fine. But when it comes to the equity audit stuff that we're supposed to do next governing year, have we started poking around there yet, or not yet?
I'm not aware of stuff one way or the other. So I know Melissa and I talked about it, and we've talked about budgeting and where it'll go from a budget perspective, but we have not talked about process and where she's at with that.
Okay, that's fine. I can reach out to her directly to ask it. Okay. Any other questions for my section? Okay, seeing none, we go to Mr. Denver.
Cool. So a few of them honestly overlap with stuff. We should coordinate when we make these reports, because I highlighted policy manual and just moving forward. It's going to be a few pieces in bylaws, but like, congrats everybody. We're through the bulk of that transition. I'm setting up one-on-ones with Katie. Our first one is on Friday, although we've talked a bit. As well as we've made 25 different training categories for the new board, was our total list, but like some of those will probably be condensed into a couple in a session. But 25 big topics. Jumping to advocacy, so WUSA had its second GA. I mildly ripped that apart today and said, hey, we need to fix it in a very polite, nice manner, but also being fairly firm that there needs to be a change there, because there's definitely some potential issues around a toxic work environment for delegates and people not being able to engage, as well as accessibility. For municipal affairs, want to highlight that Town and Gown is now sitting in the hands of Chris Reed from the university, which is moving out of the hands of Mark Dystra. Pardon?
I'm sorry, that was not material.
Okay. As well as they presented some new committees. I did have concerns about them dropping the
Unsanctioned street gatherings group because I still think that's a really big issue, and it's at a place that I think the city's really willing to work with the university. So it's interesting that they're going, hey, we're not going to talk about it anymore. As for federal affairs, UFRI wants to host an AGM in Saskatchewan. I know Matthew had raised in the chat about, potentially if that group is going to become defunct, what's the point? I don't think it's going to be do that in the next couple months. I think if it was going to do it, it'd probably be in a year or two. And it might be dependent upon the groups that have now joined CASA deciding whether they go from an observership to long-term. So it might be 2 years out.
And it's suffering, man.
Well, I see it as a better group for WUSA in the event that it was done properly. So I'm also informally probably going to volunteer some time and help that group out. Should I finish first? Or do you want to ask a question while we move through?
I was just going to make a comment too.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say that even the act of getting it to dissolve, I think involves some intervention on our part. I think either we make sure that it lives, or if it's dying painfully, that we finish it off. And that's just in WUSA's best interest to do that. It gets some finality, and we know that we put our best foot forward in terms of trying to get that group to work together in a meaningful way. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. I just ask to be trusted on this one, that Denver and I will do our best to try to resolve what is a very sticky environment for an organization that formerly worked reasonably well.
Yeah. I'm also happy if anyone wants to have a one-on-one, or if the group wants to chat about it as well, to give some more in-depth updated notes. But essentially, there's a lot of just personality conflict on that group, which has created a lot of issues. Then to bring up other things to note, you all got an email from me, Town and Gown Housing Survey. That was a bit of a ping pong back and forth, but huge thanks to Stacey and Jordan for all the support to get it to a decent place. But it's finally launched. Been running into an issue. I've received a ton of emails about people not noticing that there's a survey link on the last page, and then they close the survey and they can't enter the link. So I'm now the prize giver. But I will sort that. And I already emailed Tanya from the city about it. WUSA, we've touched base. It was a pretty lax one, aside from they highlighted near the end with a bit of prompting that at least it seems like from their perspective in some of the schools in Ontario, they might be putting less effort into this in letting more of the province handle it, and through dispersion of funding for OPP to help these events. I have concerns about that because I think, if you look at the climate of the last number of years, students have highlighted that they've had issues with police. So certainly something to be following for the next year or two and see where that lands. But this was a really preliminary, just their approach. I think Waterloo is also a little less involved than some other schools in accountability for these types of events.
Just what type of events are we talking about?
Street gatherings. Yeah. And then lastly, WUSA had RGA. So just thought there were some great motions that came through that, and really glad that the folks who attended. Want to highlight specifically the piece around archaic language and that being really important for us to try and support, because there was some concerns about people not knowing how to bring their promotions forward or 2GA. Obviously, we got those sorted, but it might be a fruitful thing just operationally for us to build in like a style guide on how to do them, and then maybe having some sort of session with us, say Mike Sameta or another pertinent staff to support those folks, not directing what the content is, but directing them in the grammar and presentation of how it works. Because I had heard from a student that was a really big barrier. And I think that's it, if folks have questions.
I had a comment about the survey.
Yeah.
Finished taking the survey, and I realized that most people expect like the you are now eligible to win the thing on the survey is now complete page, not the page with the last questions on it.
Yeah. And
I almost got past it, so I thought I'd flag that. Yeah, it would be great if it were on a separate page. Yeah, that was it's honestly just an oversight of everybody involved, I think. So the solution that I'm going to have for that is I'm just taking all those names, putting them in an Excel doc in the emails that I get, and then I researched Tanya to see if she can resolve it on her end. Right. Because it's supposed to be anonymous, but just whenever we do the draw for whoever wins, seeing if those people did the survey, because I believe we can gather that information to verify that people aren't just emailing me to enter the survey. Also, I think people would have to have a pretty intimate knowledge of how surveys work to even try and do that. So I did. You're telling them right now. Hi, all 50 people on the live stream. I just wanted to make sure that you knew what the issue was. I recognize that. Yeah, cool. It is in big text. It is. I just I saw 100% complete. I saw all questions done, and I clicked. Fair enough. Yeah. What else did this? It's the skill testing part.
Okay. Seeing that we don't have any other questions for Denver, I'm going to move on, and we're jumping all over the agenda here to discussion on communication between student governance and at-large body. I don't think we've made any new sort of things on this end. I know Mike and I have been looking a little bit at the website because there's some information that is still outdated on some very good resource pages specifically related to both the budget and the general meeting. So just playing around a little bit to get those fixed. We'll say that again, I think general meeting went really well. I might just be full of myself. But I would like to think that everyone who attended that meeting felt like they could engage, and everyone who stayed for the entire time felt like it was worth their time to have been in attendance. So I think that's the good thing. General meetings are always very difficult to do. But again, we figured out a way to make it work, and people seemed quite happy. I think it's just a matter of making sure that we don't book it the same time as a bunch of other things. For instance, the MathSoc Council meeting, and also probably trying to tap other folks we know are more involved to see if we can get them out. I'll also say that having member motions tends to draw people in. So that's another strategy to use and be aware of. Okay. Moving on to other business. Or any other business in the public session? Hello, Mark.
I was going to make a comment about the general meeting conflicting. MathSoc passed a motion in that council meeting.
Yes.
Saying that MathSoc is now no longer allowed to schedule council meetings that conflict with WUSA GMs.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, look at us go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need better coordination between some of the governing bodies. Chad?
I think that moving the GM back to in person helped a lot with getting along with people, because you can talk to the people who submitted motions before the GM starts in order to get a bit of clarity on what they mean and communicate and make those bridges. Whereas if you were online, it's a bit harder to do that. And you also sort of lose that protection of the screen and get that face-to-face eye contact, which I think is quite beneficial. That's great.
Seeing no other comments and no other business. Looking around online to confirm. Okay, can I get someone to motion us to go into confidential session?